What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. Oh my God, Rob Core, man. Let me tell y'all something. This story, dude, Blackest Night, man, this story is so good. If God was writing Green Lantern right now, this is what it would look like right now. This is one of the best stories that I've ever seen, ever read in the history of comic books. Dude, this story is so amazing. So Blackest Night is as much like a soft reboot as it is just like this amazing epic. Because remember, Blackest Night basically focuses on the resurrection of like all these dead superheroes. Kind of a resurrection. It's sort of a weird situation. But Blackest Night really is like this next stage of Geoff Johns' run on Green Lantern, and this has been a long time coming. Keep in mind, the Green Lantern, landscape as it's progressed over the course of the entire, series that we've done so far, which we cover every Sunday, the idea is that it all started with like Sinestro Corps War, right? Like Thal Sinestro, formerly a Green Lantern, abused his powers, he was banished, he found a Yellow Lantern, or he basically had a Yellow Lantern ring created for himself, and then formed his own corps. This led as a direct conflict between the Green Lanterns and the Sinestro Corps. But the idea was that this was really rooted in the character of Abin Sur. Abin Sur was a Green Lantern. He was the one who died on Earth and gave his ring to Hal Jordan. But Abin Sur had been told of the prophecy of Blackest Night by a being named Atrocitus. Atrocitus had looked into the future and saw that there was going to be this massive war of light, and the Black Lanterns would rise and extinguish all life across the universe. But the Guardians of the Universe saw this as fear-mongering. Atrocitus was the guy who made the Red Lantern Corps. And so the idea was that because Green Lanterns have to overcome fear in order to be able to use their powers, that this was all just a tactic used by Atrocitus for the purpose of weakening Abin Sur so he could be defeated. Because of this, almost none of the Guardians took it seriously. The only two who did were Ganthet and Sade. And in order to protect themselves from the prophecy of Blackest Night and to ensure that there would be some sort of way to win, they formed the Blue Lantern Corps. And so at that point, it was just a waiting game. We had the Blue Lanterns there, we had the Indigo tribe, this super mysterious Lantern Corps that we didn't really know anything about. You had the Star Sapphires, who were a Lantern Corps rooted in love. You had the Green Lanterns, you had the Sinestro Corps that was kind of out there somewhere, and then you had the Red Lanterns, and that was really about it. I mean, it was just, okay, now we're just having these stories and we're just waiting until Blackest Night happens. But all of this really stems from a guy named William Hand. This guy is a dude who was just obsessed with death. But because all the different Lantern Corps that exist out there have entities, basically these living embodiments of their respective emotions, the living embodiment of death is a being named Necron. And this is the person that William Hand basically worships. But the idea here is that this all initially kicks off with William Hand literally going to the grave of Bruce Wayne and taking his skull. Now, this comes immediately out of Final Crisis, and we have not covered Final Crisis just because of the fact that that story is an exercise in the absolute befuddlement and mind-boggling of why a person would write a story like that. But the long and short of Bruce Wayne's involvement in Final Crisis is that the villain Darkseid, one of the new gods, had basically sought to dominate all things in existence by using the anti-life equation. At the end of the story, Bruce Wayne fired a killing shot at Darkseid. Darkseid used his Omega sanctions, which should have just killed Bruce Wayne. Instead, he was actually time displaced, which is one of the roles this story serves to basically show us that Bruce Wayne's not dead, but everyone believes he's dead. And so because of this, of course, he's been buried at Wayne Manor, so on and so forth. And the idea is that in the face of Bruce Wayne being believed to have been dead, we end up having all these Black Lantern rings, which are just sent out across the entire universe. Now, what this does is this switches over to Coast City. And this is kind of a cool thing because again, all this really goes back to like Hal Jordan becoming Parallax. For those of you guys who are new to the whole Green Lantern landscape, Coast City plays a really significant role, not just because of its location, but because of the place that it has within the realm of the superhero community. Coast City is basically the main base of operations, the main city for Hal Jordan. It's really like his home, more or less. And the idea was that back in the 1990s, DC wanted to get rid of Hal Jordan. They wanted to remove him from the equation and replace him with a new Green Lantern. So what DC did is they wrote a story called Emerald Twilight. And Emerald Twilight came out of the death of Superman. We had Superman dying at the hands of Doomsday. We had 4 new Supermen who popped up on the scene. One of these was a guy named Cyborg. And the idea was that Cyborg Superman, alongside a villain named Mongol, attacked Coast City and destroyed it. The result was that when Hal Jordan came back from a mission in space, he found everything he knew and loved completely completely obliterated. What this did is it left him open to exposure to fear. Basically, he lost his ability to overcome fear for a temporary amount of time. But in that small window, it allowed the living embodiment of fear named Parallax to enter Hal Jordan. Now, the idea of Parallax entering Hal Jordan and possessing him, that was a Geoff Johns change. That was not something that we learned until like 2006, 2007. But the idea was that at the time, it was basically Hal Jordan just becoming a bad guy. And so what ended up happening here is Hal Jordan basically just laid waste to the entirety of the Green Lantern Corps. It was a massacre like nothing we'd ever seen before. He ended up destroying all the Green Lanterns. He killed all the Guardians of the Universe except for one. And so what ended up happening is that with Hal Jordan basically mainlining the willpower emotion and mainlining fear, he basically became God, just started calling himself Parallax. Now what this did is it led to the last remaining Guardian of the Universe, Ganthet, traveling to Earth and giving Kyle Rayner a ring. And that's where Kyle Rayner ended up becoming the Green Lantern. That's how his whole origin story comes into play. But the idea here is that because Coast City was being rebuilt as part of Geoff Johns' run on the Green Lantern stories, what this does is it brings us to its conclusion, which is to say Coast City has been fixed now. Coast City has been repaired. People are starting to move back. It's this whole revelation that Coast City is the place to be now. And it's a celebration of a multitude of different things. This also comes on the holiday that's basically been created as a result of Superman's death. When Superman died at the hands of Doomsday back in the 1990s, the superheroes of the DC universe basically christened that as a holiday. When he came back, it was the day of Superman's death, the day of Superman's return, so on and so forth. And so that became like this national event. But what ends up happening is we get this sort of rundown about all these different instances of people who have died, people who have loved others, who have lost the ones they loved. It's really kind of this day to remember all the most important things in life, but to also honor those individuals who have died. And so again, it's touching on these various characters, these various individuals who have played roles in the realm of the superhero community. One of the more notable instances is Aquaman Arthur Curry. Following the event of Infinite Crisis, basically the story that brought the multiverse back after Crisis on Infinite Earths, DC had a series of comics called 52, but they also had something called The Missing Year. And the idea was that after Infinite Crisis, Aquaman was gone. Nobody knew where he was. Now, the intention of DC at the time was to actually kill him, was to have him dead and gone forever. But Aquaman, despite the legacy of being the guy that quote unquote talks to fish, fans still loved him and fans wanted him to return, so he ended up making his debut. What this ends up doing is it still leaves out there the idea that Aquaman is dead. Not only that, it actually solidifies the belief that Aquaman's dead in the sense that with Mera and with Garth, basically, Aqualad more or less, talking about the death of Aquaman and overlooking his grave and so on and so forth, he actually ends up re-emerging. He's one of these other people who pops up during the whole event of Blackest Night, which is to say a person who has a Black Lantern ring. Now, he's not the first person we see. I just kind of throw it in there because we were talking about Aquaman anyway. What we actually end up doing is picking up with Barry Allen. Again, one of the big revelations that came during Final Crisis is that where Barry Allen was believed to have died during Crisis on Infinite Earths, and it only ever really popped up once in a while in terms of like a flashback or something along those lines, what Final Crisis revealed and what Flash Rebirth, the original Flash Rebirth revealed, was that Barry Allen never died. Barry Allen merged with the Speed Force, and in the 20 some odd years, or even longer than that, the 25 years that he had basically been missing from DC Comics, in truth, he'd actually been in the Speed Force outrunning death constantly. And so because of that, during Final Crisis, Barry Allen re-emerged, and it was one of the coolest moments ever because it's like Jay Garrick and I think Wally West and like one other person they're there, and like a portal opens up and it's just like, Jay, Wally, run! And like Barry Allen comes running out of this portal, and like I remember reading, and it was like, holy cow! It was hilarious because if you go and look at message boards back in 2009, people were just like, what? People were freaking out because Barry Allen returned, and it was one of the crazy things. But the other half of this is that with Barry Allen being alive, one thing to keep in mind is that his return basically comes after 25 years of being absent. And so literally Hal Jordan catches him up on everyone who's died over the last 25 years, whether it was a day ago or it was 25 years ago. And this includes a lot of people. It includes John Jones, Martian Manhunter, Black Canary, Dove, Aquaman. It includes all these characters Barry had fought alongside during his years when he was a superhero. And so learning all of this, what we also end up finding out is that the Justice League is not without honor. The Justice League actually ended up taking the corpses of people whose identities as villains were known and basically keeping them in the Hall of Justice, giving them an honorable burial. Now, the other half of this really deals with what's going on out in space, which is to say the War of Light. Remember, while all this is taking place on Earth, all the other Lantern Corps are out fighting. Basically, basically all of the Green Lanterns that exist out there, with the exception of like Hal Jordan on Earth, they're all out in space. They're all fighting against the Zamorans, the Star Sapphires, the Sinestro Corps. I mean, they're basically engaged in this massive war of light. And that's what the Guardians begin to comment on. None of these guys believed it was real. None of these guys believed that the War of Light was going to happen. None of them believed the Blackest Night prophecy was actually going to come to fruition. But faced with this War of Light, faced with the Green Lanterns fighting the Red Lanterns, fighting the Blue Lanterns, fighting the Indigos, fighting the Star Sapphires, fighting the Sinestro Corps, faced with all of that, the Guardians of the Universe now have to come to accept the fact that the War of Light is happening. The problem with this is that it's preparing for an earthquake after the earthquake's already started. It's too late. And so at this point, they're literally just under damage control. But what little hope they have in trying to stave off this War of Light, or at the very least, trying to come out on the winning side, is almost completely swept away when the Scarred Guardian reveals her allegiance to the Black Lanterns. Remember, after the events of Sinestro Corps War, there were these small things that happened here and there in the Green Lantern story that all led into this Blackest Night run. This is essentially the first strike. In this instance, one of the Guardians is killed by the Scarred Guardian, the rest are imprisoned, and the shield around Oa is brought down. And what this does is it allows these Black Lantern rings to just start flying and just begin bonding themselves to all these dead Green Lanterns and resurrecting them. If you guys haven't grasped it by now, all hell is breaking loose. This is crazy. Katie bar the door. Man, this is why I say this story is so good. Man, Geoff Johns, why do you have to write such damn good stories? All like things are just popping off. And that's what people are basically coming to realize here. Kyle Rayner, Kilowog, Guy Gardner, these guys who are like, members of the Green Lantern Corps out there in space, Barry Allen, Hal Jordan, they're coming to the realization that all these dead superheroes are coming back as Black Lanterns. And that's what's so cool about this, because what ends up happening is we basically have all this pandemonium taking place. Now, another thing to keep in mind are the characters of Elongated Man and Sue Dibney. Sue Dibney's character really gained like her biggest moment in DC Comics when she was killed by Jean Loring during the events of Identity Crisis. Now that's a story that we haven't covered yet just because it's so controversial. It's a pretty dark story. It's pretty crazy, but it basically deals with like mind wiping, different things like that. But the idea here is that Elongated Man essentially died during Countdown to Final Crisis, I think it was. And so they've been gone for quite some time, Sue Dibney having already been killed. And so this is basically bringing those characters back for kind of a short stint. Now they have like pretty significant roles in the hearts and minds of a lot of DC fans everywhere. A lot of DC fans are just like, yeah, man, Ralph Dibney, I don't know what he did outside of Identity Crisis, but I remember that. I remember Sue Dibney during Identity Crisis, but I don't know anything about her outside of that, which is fine because a lot of people latch on to characters during particular stories. The idea here is that this is essentially different people trying to deal with the emergence of these Black Lanterns all at the same time. Now with Aquaman, with him popping up as a Black Lantern, this basically goes into him killing off a multitude of his soldiers, attempting to take Mira as his queen, and then using his powers to literally just kill almost everybody else around him. Now, of course, this also introduces the death of Garth, but again, this is when we start getting into this whole soft reboot thing. The reason for this is because of the fact that with like Elongated Man and Sue Dibney, for example, they end up showing up and they kill Hawkman and they kill Hawkwoman, and then they basically turn them into Black Lanterns. But the idea was for DC to essentially kill off all these different characters and then say, okay, with all these characters quote unquote being dead, here's the ones that we're gonna bring back. And so it was essentially kind of a soft reboot. It was better than simply having like Hawkman walk down the road and get shot in the face and they're like, the death of Hawkman. Like, it was a lot more interesting than that. So it kept things interesting, it kept them going smoothly, but it also allowed DC to get rid of characters that either weren't popular or their stories weren't selling or what have you. But one of the other things that we end up learning is that these characters who were dead and are being quote unquote resurrected are not their real selves. And that actually comes from a guy named Boston Brand. Now, Deadman is a guy who basically just goes around inhabiting bodies. He just takes over people. He's part of that whole DC Vertigo, mysticism, magic. He's part of all that storyline that goes over there. But the reason why this matters is because Deadman actually shows up as a Black Lantern while simultaneously existing as his normal self. And so what this means is that these Black Lanterns that are running around as superheroes are not actually resurrected superheroes. Instead, they're basically duplicates. But the reason why this matters, and the reason why them showing up the way they do is pause for concern, is because in order for them to basically begin rising, in order for them to essentially charge the central power battery to 100%, they need people who are in various emotional states, and then they need to consume their hearts. And so what this does is, with them emerging, with these various superheroes faced with teammates, friends, former lovers, who are believed to have been resurrected from the dead as evil lanterns, then suddenly it starts putting them in this emotional state of fear or rage or something along those lines. And because they're so charged with emotional energy, they take their hearts, they consume them, and the entire Black Lantern Corps is even more empowered because of it. Now, one of the biggest moments of the Black Lantern Corps comes in the form of the Spectre. Remember, the Spectre is basically the representation of God's vengeance, but the Spectre is one of these characters in DC Comics who's about as close as we get to DC's iteration of like the cosmic entities. Remember, Marvel deals with things like the representation of the universe, how long it takes from the time the universe was made to the time that it ends, that time span. They have like cosmic entities for that. They have cosmic entities that represent the entirety of the universe. They have cosmic entities that represent all these different things. DC plays it a little more realistic. DC plays it as, okay, so there's the presence. There's basically God in the DC universe. Then there's like Lucifer Morningstar, basically Satan. But the reason why this matters is because these characters, these higher pantheon of characters in DC, are largely considered to be so astronomically powerful that they're well beyond the capabilities of any traditional superhero. But then in the face of these Black Lanterns emerging, these rings bonding themselves to people, one of the rings takes over and corrupts the Spectre. And so what this means is that the power of the Black Lantern rings is basically of the highest echelon, of the highest order, that no one can withstand the power of these rings. The reason why this matters is because this is Geoff Johns basically saying no one's safe. There's no safe haven, but he does provide one exception. The only exception he provides to this are individuals who died and are at peace. And so what it basically seems to indicate is that the only individuals who can be resurrected, or who can basically be copied by the Black Lantern rings, are individuals who died under grudging circumstances, people who died unwillingly. And so because that, it allows them to basically be copied, to reemerge, and it just sends things spiraling almost out of control. Now, of course, this also brings into fray the superheroes doing the best they can, because again, when you're faced with power like this, it's not a matter of overcoming them by traditional means. It's a matter of just running like hell and hoping you survive another day. And in this instance, this is brought to us by virtue of Barry Allen and Hal Jordan. Remember, Barry Allen is a chemist as much as he is the Flash, and it's not very often that you see those two things go hand in hand. You usually see that aspect of his personality when he's doing his normal job as a forensic investigator. But it's cool seeing him in this instance because, as we know with Martian Manhunter, his biggest weakness is fire. And so it makes sense to Barry Allen to basically just start dousing him, surrounding him with chemicals, and then when Hal Jordan throws a car in and the car blows up, everything catches aflame, that Martian Manhunter would be weakened. The problem with this is that that's not the case. Instead, John Jones, Martian Manhunter, emerges just like he did before. And so what this does is, again, this sets the stage by saying that the traditional weakness of superheroes as they existed before they became Black Lanterns is not really effective here. Instead, you have to defeat them as Black Lanterns as opposed to how they used to be. Now from here, we actually end up transitioning to a guy named Jason Rush and to a girl named, I guess it's Jenny. It's spelled really weird. It's like Gehnee or something like that. But the idea here is that this was DC's attempt to basically reinvigorate the whole concept of Firestorm. Remember, Ronnie Raymond as Firestorm had been that way for quite some time, and it's one of the most popular iterations of his character. And this instance is actually Jason and this girl, Jenny, we're gonna go ahead and call her that, who basically inhabit the same body, or at least who will become the Firestorm concept. The issue with this is that Jason had basically merged with several people before this, so it was literally DC grabbing him and saying, okay, Jason Rush will be the main Firestorm person, and then we'll grab whoever else and see which person fans like the most. The issue was that Jenny was not really a character fans enjoyed too much, so they actually end up killing her off in this story. But again, one of the other things that we end up learning is that the Black Lantern rings cannot just be removed by traditional means. Instead, the rings actually grow roots down into the person. They are part and parcel. So trying to remove the ring is almost impossible because the ring will come back. That person is part of the Black Lantern Corps, and they will stay that way unless a tried and true means of taking them down can actually be found. And so because of this, with Jason Rush, with Jenny basically going through investigating as best they can, of course, we end up finding out that they were summoned to the Hall of Justice by Mira herself, the wife of Aquaman. And that's really where this story begins to hit home, because what this is just escaping. It's them just fleeing for their lives. Now, of course, this also coincides with the arrival of the Indigo tribe. Now, remember, the Indigo tribe are very mysterious. But one of the reasons why the Indigo tribe are so powerful is because they can tap into and manipulate other lantern cores. And so in this instance, Indigo 1, the leader of the Indigo tribe, is actually able to separate one of the Black Lanterns from their rings using a combination of the Indigo tribe's power and the Green Lantern's power. So again, what this does is it actually tells everybody else who's there that being able to defeat the Black Lanterns basically comes through combining powers together and trying to take them out. But that's a stopgap measure. All it's really going to do is solve things temporarily. What they need is a tried and true measure of bringing the Black Lanterns down. And the cool thing about this is Geoff Johns teases it to us. Geoff Johns actually tells us something called the white light. And what he basically says is that in the beginning of all things, there was simply just white light. There was just white. That's all there was. But eventually the darkness essentially, overruled the light. It took over and it led to the creation of all life, the emotional spectrum, and so on. And the white light fragmented. And so what this means is that the White Lantern ring, as most people know by now, is effectively a combination of all the lantern rings, brought together, or at least one of each lantern ring combined into one. And that, of course, will be the means by which they end up winning. I mean, I don't mind throwing that out there because this story came out like 8 years ago. So most people know what's going on with regards to this. But again, at this point, it's just a matter of trying to get away. It's just a matter of trying to win. Now, of course, this leads to Jenny basically being killed off. And again, fans didn't really enjoy her too much. She was mysterious. DC never really expanded on her. And so because of that, they ended up killing her character off, and it leaves the landscape open for Jason to merge with someone else. And so in the face of all this, because of the fact that the Black Lanterns are continuing to rise in prominence, the question becomes, where's Superman? Where's Wonder Woman? Where are these superheroes that we're most familiar with, who we would think would at the very least be here in the midst of this conflict? Well, we're not immediately told. And in fact, there's actually tie-ins for those characters, which we are going to cover. But in the face of recognizing that a combination of Green Lantern energy among other forms of energy can temporarily defeat individual members of the Black Lanterns, it then becomes basically Barry Allen running around broadcasting this information to everyone who's out there. And so this is when we find out that Wonder Woman is fighting these Black Lanterns, that all these different characters who exist out there, the Titans, the Teen Titans, that they're all facing off against these Black Lanterns, doing the best they can. Not only that, it's also this revelation that individuals like Dr. Fate are Black Lanterns. Dr. Fate, of course, again, being the predecessor to Marvel's Doctor Strange. But again, these are all great moments. Power Girl, Alan Scott, the Green Lantern of Earth 2. All these characters are facing off against the best they can to hold off against unstoppable odds. And so as this section of the video begins to wind down, what ends up happening is the Black Lantern central power battery is teleported to Coast City by the Scarred Guardian. And what we end up finding out is that with the central power battery charged at 100%, what it does is it allows the living embodiment of death, the entity known as Necron, to enter into the earthly plane, to enter into the main DC universe and make his presence known, while simultaneously resurrecting every single person who's ever died in Coast City and dragging them into the Black Lantern Corps. With that being said, guys, we're gonna go ahead and bring this video to an end. Man, I love this story. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.